Hello there, YouTube, and welcome to another cat stream. Sorry about the lighting of my camera today, but I was actually able to get my laptop fixed, so small victories, maybe. As you can see, today we have my normal co-host. We have the Ogre.
How y'all doing?
We have our conspiracy nut in for today, which is Boz.
Hello.
Oz.
And we also have the amazing Crumple Point, or as we like to call him, Soap.
This is going to be a strong and stable stream.
Oh dear, we're all going to die at the end. This is going to be a strong and stable stream. We're talking about Brexit. We might have a general election in the middle of it to determine if we got the right leader in place or not. We're not sure. After that general election, we might even push for a second referendum, as we don't really know what we voted for in the first place. Apparently. But no, that's all to come in the stream. We are going to be talking about the lovely Brexit. But as it's a conspiracy theory stream, as it's a Wednesday, we're actually going to be talking about the conspiracies that stem from Brexit. The fact is, when some people were first talking about it and first implementing the idea, people's first reactions were, won't ever happen. Europe won't let us do it. And that's just one conspiracy theory from it. There are very, very many others. For instance, there's a couple that say that America wouldn't let us do it because that means that we wouldn't be part of Europe anymore and we wouldn't be able to trade with other people. Now, personally, I think that's idiotic, but it's a theory. And those type of things, as we do on Wednesdays as a conspiracy theory stream, is the simple factors. First of all, we have to get this out of the way. The views and thoughts that are expressed on the stream are solely for the purpose of a thought experiment. Nobody necessarily holds these actual points or truths to be real or fake. These are just opinions and thought experiments. That being said, who else would like to kick off with a conspiracy theory for Brexit?
I don't really mind.
Firstly, I'd just like to call for a second stream because I'm upset and my feelings are hurt and I don't agree with the first decision to have this stream.
Well, I say to that, sir, we've already had a referendum. The people have spoken. We spoke at around about 2.5 people were able to say that we wanted to have the stream. You're that 1.5 that didn't, so fuck you.
Good. You're the kind of strong leader I like.
Somebody get this man a field of wheat.
Yay! I want to get the chaff and get rid of it. Get rid of the chaff. No, I completely like that. Oh, it's good to see Jensen Quinn actually in the chat, so it's good to see that he's still alive. The conspiracy theory for the conspiracy has now been solved. He is alive, he is well. So that is one good thing.
All right.
It's good to see you out there. Good to see you out
I mean, the dramatic music, just because I believe you people are getting screwed. And I'll tell you why. There was something going on over here in the very early beginning of the second decade of the new millennium. They were trying to put a parkway from Mexico up through Texas, Oklahoma, all the way up to Canada. And that would have, you had to have a treaty, because on that highway, trucks would have been able to move from point A to point B without a bunch of, hassles and paperwork checks. In other words, free movement. And that also included, I don't want to get the mileage wrong, but several miles to each side. Anybody that's familiar with the Transcontinental Railway will know that how when the railroads wanted to build the railways, not only because they could have their trains run on it, but they got an allotment, an easement on each side of 50 miles. They got 100 miles wide strip that went with it that they would own from that point. And so anyway, so I don't want to get too long on this. This was trying to blend together this over here North American Union that probably would have blended South America into it. To have one currency, they want the EU, they want the Union, African Union, and the Middle Eastern Union. They want one world government controlled by, we already have the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. We have the World Bank. These things are horrible institutions, too, by the way, people. When you hear folks talk about this, they're like, I mean, they just mention it like it's okay. To me, it'd be like if I suddenly said, oh, yeah, later on tonight, I'm going to get with Satan himself, and we're going to have a few pints. And I'm gonna, we're going to go out and get some babes, me and Satan. And we're going to double, we're going to do the Satan's duo on him. It's that's serious. I mean, it's that serious. So why aren't you Brexiting? They want you back in there, folks.
Oh,
Your
yeah,
money,
definitely. That's a
your
definite.
money, your goods, your people, they want to be able to destroy your culture. There's too many intelligent Brits. You're tinkers. You've made, I mean, Rolls Royce. Come on. Do we need to talk about the Spitfire? Do we really have to get into building
I'm
the
really
first?
proud of the Rover.
Pardon me?
I'm really proud of the Rover.
I mean, so many things. So there it is. I believe that you're getting the shaft on this Brexit. Because even the Ramoners are getting the shaft, boys, whether they like it or not, whether they want to admit it or not, they don't realize that this is the best thing for them. They just don't want to admit it. They don't know it yet. They would see that in a few years past. But it's because they want this global network, this global conspiracy of banks.
Yes.
I'm telling you, I'm not the only one that thinks that.
No,
I'm not the only one that thinks that.
No, I completely agree with you on that one. I actually think that's a definite. If you look at the processes that are to do with the European Union itself, the Asians were going to make something very similar, I would assume, at some point. But as you said, the Middle East will do their own union, Africa will make their own union, and North and South America will make their own union, or we're going to. I completely agree with that statement because they want it as a world government, as you quite rightly said. The problem is that I have with that is the same thing as what I would try to explain to anybody that wanted the idea of free and open borders or free and open socialism for everybody, or to be under that idea or that guise of idea. Okay, fine, you want this. How are you going to implement it? If you're going to have it so that you have one particular section or demographic that's North and South America, for instance, so you have Canada's economics and Canada's demographics, you have the United States is economics and demographics. You also have all of the rest of them going all the way down with all the different countries that you're now trying to implement into one structure, meaning there will probably be something similar to where the Europe is run, which means that distribution of wealth will still be actually distributed unevenly, believe it or not, because even though Germany pays a lot in, Germany gets a lot out, and vice versa for the rest of the big countries. The only difference is that the smaller countries get a little bit more. But that's the only differences with Europe. But the price that you have to pay is that you are dictated to, meaning that you don't have you don't have borders, you don't have these processes of being able to go, okay, let's form a census and find out how many people are in our country so we can actually work out what's going on. Because guess what? You don't have a country because you're being enveloped into the state that is something similar to Europe. And if other countries were to follow that suit, we would not have a world government. We would have world wars. Because that would create more divisions than what countries would do.
Yes.
And on a more sinister side, it sometimes appears to me as if there's going to be one section of elites that are working for global companies that are controlling an entire almost race of low-skilled, uneducated workers, and anyone who doesn't form in with that is going to be removed in a nefarious way. You can make what you want of that. So Europe is going to be one race of low-skilled workers, and anyone else is gone.
That's what I was getting at too, mate. That's why I was saying that y'all are tinkers. You just finished my point for me perfectly. Because why wouldn't they want that though? If I might ask, Maz.
Well, it's all about profit, isn't it? And why would you pay me £10 an hour when you can pay someone else £5 an hour?
This is where I part ways with a lot of people in regards to the sort of globalist thing, because I don't really think it's anything to do with money. I really genuinely think it's the domination thing. Like, so long as they can dominate people, that's what it's really all about. I mean, if money gets them the ability to do that, then great. But if there was no such thing as money, then they would be torturing young babies for fun. You know, like it's pure domination, in my opinion. And the people doing this, I think it comes down to two separate ways of viewing it, people, and I think it really is just two ways. You've got the side of the people in power and the people who like the people in power, and they believe that everyone on the planet is exactly the same. Humans are a natural resource like any other, and it's there to be used, and that's that. And then you've got people who are individualists who believe that, well, no, not everybody is just this homogenous lump. People are unique and have a bit of, there's something special about them. And I think that's fundamentally where a lot of these disagreements come from. And I think that's what socialists, they pretend that they have compassion for people, but they also believe that people are all the same, which is the opposite of having compassion for people, in my opinion. So that's where I think it comes from.
Well, sorry, I just read the chat, and Jensen Quinn just made me laugh, so I'm going to have to read it out. Maybe we should say to the EU, choke me, daddy. Choke me, daddy. But no, to get on to an actual serious point, apart from obviously reading the chat, I do actually agree with you. I do think it's not done from the process of trying to relieve the natural person that lives there, or the native that lives in any country. It's to do with making a populace that's easily controllable, or more susceptible to control, rather than the populace that has already evolved to be thinking of a proper liberal secular democracy, where the countries that they're trying to import people from are not coming from liberal democracies, or even democracies in most cases. They're coming from either monarchies or all-out dictatorships. And yes, you could quote me and say that they're the same thing. Yeah, technically they are, but you have to be correct on what you're talking about. But they are coming from those type of places, which means that they are more easily controlled. And I think that's the reason why people are being able to lead these into Europe and in trying to force them into America. But more importantly, or should I say, it more of a case of it being more hypocritically, should I say. The left always say that they should have open borders and everything else like that. But if you say to them that you want to go to Africa and you should have Africa as an open country or open borders, then they don't seem to really like that too much. They say that no, they should be protected. They should be able to have their area and they should be able to live the way that they want to live. I'm just thinking, why is that said for people that come from a certain country, but yet why is it always pushed onto other people from that country? And to answer the second question, is a case of, if you don't believe in open borders, if you believe in open borders for westernized democracies, why do you not believe in open borders for dictatorships? I always want to get a leftist person on to actually answer those questions, because I've never understood them.
Well, are you asking African supremacists?
I would actually say that he's either so far left that he's basically right.
Oh, I wasn't sure.
It's almost not worth asking, though, because we know that the pithy answer they would give, or in my estimation, what they would give, is that they would say that the dictatorship comes from the closed borders, and if they were to open the borders, it wouldn't be a dictatorship anymore. That's what I think they'd say, because I'm thinking about what they say about America and Britain, and how we're becoming fascist, and how the borders are a sign of that, and I reckon that they associate that with...
But that's not what they... Well, that's not what they actually say when you talk to them. Is it like, for instance, with Owen McDonald? I'm sure most people know who he is on here. If not, then go and watch his channel. He's very, very interesting to watch, especially on Twitter. But with somebody like him, when he advocates for open borders in westernized countries, he wants closed borders in Africa. He doesn't want people interfering in that asset, or he doesn't want people going across to other third world countries, so to speak. He doesn't want that. But yet, from westernized versions of it, he wants them to be open borders. Why is it that he wants everybody that's from to quote Donald Trump, a shithole country, to come to the good countries, but doesn't want to let the good people come from that country to the other way? Why don't they want it the other way?
Yeah. And why can't some of them go to Japan or South Korea? Or, I mean, there's other countries that are doing really good, and, they're not going to take them either. That's another point on that, is all I'm saying. Piggyback on the second question. I can't really answer those. I'm going to leave it to these two lads, because I think everybody knows, no border, no country. Even the nomadic Indians and the nomadic Bedouins in the Middle East always had a, I understand that they moved. I mean, Bedouins were nomadic. It's hence the word nomadic tribesmen. But when they moved there, they did consider this realm around them and where they'd been and where they're going to come back to. Let's not forget that the Native Americans here, they would bury corn. They would bury things in pots. They would bury stuff in the ground so that when they came back to that place, when the hunting wasn't as good out in the hunting, out in the, you know, where they were going to hunt, they'd come back and they had their stores there and they had their meat to turn into pemmican and whatnot. You know, I don't want to get too long-winded about that, but we have to have borders. Everybody recognizes borders. And guess what? Those same Native Americans that everybody likes to point to and tell about how downtrodden they were, if you encroached on their land, over 90% of them would catch you, kill you, and eat you. Be not mistaken. We really cover it up in our history here. It's not like they broadcast it as they do with the people in New Guinea and the Pacific Islands for the most part. There wasn't a lot of cannibalism in the Virgin Islands or down here in the Bahamas, but there was out in the Pacific Islands, and there was on this continent. But they want to, you know, glaze that over, and they want to say, oh, these people lived in happy harmony with each other, and everybody could go anywhere they wanted. Fuck that. If you were Algonquin and you stepped on Blackfoot territory and you were over there shooting deer and building camps, man, they'd kill you and put you in a stew pot. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, and can we just, that's a really great way of putting it, right? Because the thing then comes with that situation, how do you know whose bit's whose? It could be a good faith accident, and you've shot a deer on somebody else's territory and you didn't know. Maybe you're a young guy, you don't know the unspoken borders yet. And then what happens is, because there weren't any clearly defined borders and there wasn't a fence or any signs or anything like that, everybody goes to war over it. Because the two peoples still exist.
Right.
So surely a border is a buffer against things like that happening as well, because everybody knows which bit is theirs.
That's right. That's right.
See, Owen McDonald was. I was watching a stream that he put together a couple of days ago, because I sometimes like to hear other people's arguments and see where they're coming from and understand their points of view. And he asked the guy that he was debating, why do you think the way that you do? Why do you think a country has a right to sovereignty? Why do you think a country has a right to dispel or stop people from coming in? And to be fair, I don't know the guy that he was debating, so I don't want to talk bad about him or anything. But he was the guy that he was debating was kind of flustered and kind of oohed and ahed and kind of didn't really go anywhere. And I wanted to put into the description box or to the comment sections that the reason why countries can determine who and what they want to let in and let out of their countries, and the reasons why they have that right, is because of the social contract. Because that we say that we will elect people to lead us so that they can be able to protect us. That also includes a citizenry. That citizenry then gives you the right to stay in that country and be part of that country. Meaning the people that come outside that want to come into the country are not citizens of that country. Meaning that they do not have the same rights. So with that simple premise, it's a case of no, we get to tell who comes in and who's comes out. Simple as, because we need to protect the people that are already here. That's the state's job. Simple as that.
And the thing is that, like, if you believe that people are, so I consider it like a move down the chain. So if you believe that, you know, it's a sovereign planet, let's say, then the next step down from that is sovereign continents, countries, cities, people. You know, so we need to keep the nation state a thing, because that then keeps independent cities a thing, potentially. You know, not like nations, but, you know, maybe one day. And then that keeps the individual more sovereign. Whereas if you just dispense with all that, you've got absolute chaos, which is what they want, by the way.
It takes away individual sovereignty, I believe, when you talk about in the cities. Look, when you condense people, you always take away sovereignty, because individual sovereignty is the only sovereignty, by the way, I believe in. But when you condense people down, you always have your neighbors saying, I don't like how Crumple Point puts his garbage out. I don't like how Ogre stays up late at night. He don't really make noise, but he's drinking beer and walking around in his garden in the moonlight. We don't like that. You know, and you get that stuff, and it restricts the only freedom that we really should all fight for, and that is individual. That's it. I mean, let me do what I want to do.
My point was we should have as
want.
many stages in between us and the global as possible. Is kind of what I was getting at. So
just trying to start.
I answer to my local council that answers to the the city council, the national government, and then so on. And if you dispense with the regional sovereignty and then the national sovereignty, all you've got is the one world government. And don't believe for a minute that they don't want to be a thing and that they don't exist.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the smaller. The smaller, it's like, why do I own my house? Why do I have the right to decide who's coming into my house? If I see someone standing outside who wants to come in and they're carrying knives, machetes or whatever, I'm probably not going to let them in. And Mr. CSG said it best when he said that the government is supposed to represent us and protect us in the same manner, in a bigger picture.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I do feel that the reasons why I think Owen MacDonald's purpose and point was the fact that it was a case of he was trying to get to the crux of the position of why do countries have borders? And the reasons why countries have borders in themselves is because humans are naturally aggressive and are territorial. Hence why the reasons why we have identity politics now. We're tribalistic. Doesn't matter how far away you are from an evolutionary standpoint, you still have that basis, creed, and need to want to be either in a position that you can say, this is mine, go away. Whether it's, as you quite rightly said, Moz, whether you own your house or whether you're in a country. The thing is with the country that you can actually implement those ideas and those points that you can actually put for the country. The thing is, if you have open borders, you don't then have a country. You can then not implement any of those ideas. Because if you do, you have to implement it for multiple countries, multiple locations. How do you police that? How do you then go across and actually enforce that without draconian laws? How do you not do that without trying to sanction countries for not following their own democratic process, for instance? You just look at Europe and look how Europe is going for the idea of democracy and the fact that European Union is sanctioning countries left, right, and centre because their democratically elected leaders are saying, no, we do not want to have refugees here, we do not want to have immigrants here, blah, 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 blah. And yet they are getting sanctioned left, right, and centre just because they are part of a union.
Well, this is why it's a thing with collectivism versus individualism, because I think to maybe put my point a little bit better, it's more like specificity than anything else. So you go like, people are like this. That's a very general statement. They have 4 limbs and a head. That is general statement. And then you go, right, okay, Africans, Asians, and Europeans are like this. There's a bit more specific. And then you keep doing that down the way until you can go, all right, Germans are like this, but Bavarians are like this, but Bavarians from this town are like this. And they want to get rid of all that because they want to view people as this homogenous group. And the easiest way to do that is break down all the barriers so that people have to flee to the mob, which is what these people are, by the way. They're just a mob. And once they flee to the mob, there's no organization, there's no civilization. And that means that the people, your IMF types, that means that they just need to bide their time and keep a hold of the levers of power. And then they can plonk down whatever they like amidst the chaos and nothing will be there to stop them. And because people go on about the differences between Scotland and England, but they're less than differences between the UK and France.
Mm-hmm.
So the more specific you get, the better. And the nation state is a way of keeping things very specific to the people that live there and all the way down to the individual. And I think a lack of respect for the nation state is, in some sense, depending on how rabid it is a lack of self-respect and a lack of respect for the individual, in my opinion, because they want to view people as this vanilla lump of natural resource.
I completely not agree with your point, and I'm going to add to it as well. What you said is completely and utterly true. The fact that they want to stop the differentiating between different peoples. They want to stop people going, well, I'm English and you're Welsh and you're Scottish and you're French and you're German. They want everybody to go, no, I'm European. Because they have a sense of belief and sense of duty to think that this is going to be the case of making everybody equal. It's a false identity of trying to create people as equals. you have these people that believe in the idea of either anarchism or anarcho communism, and it's a case of with that, it's a case of, okay, well, you believe in that system where you don't actually have any forms of government. How do you lead yourself? Oh, there will be natural leaders. Yes, those natural leaders will generally probably be the point of people beating the shit out of other people to make sure that they can actually hold on to power. How do you stem your form of destroying government, as flawed as it is at this moment in time, obviously, hence why we're talking about Brexit. But as flawed as it is at the minute, it's the best system we have without going into it and completely uprooting it and changing it. The idea that you're trying to push this anarchism and anarcho-communism, or even anarcho-socialism, which some people believe in, is a case of where are you going to get this form of leadership from? Where are you going to get this form of natural divinity where everybody is going to be created equal, so to speak? You're not. All you're doing is going to force people back into being tribes, literal tribes on different countries. You're going to have the tribe of Lincolnshire, for instance, fighting off against the tribe of Staffordshire or Norfolk, so that they can actually increase their wealth and increase their property again. Instead of it being, you're literally taking everything back to imperialism. Because
the anarcho-socialist types are really quite funny. It reminds me of gangsters. You know, in gangster movies, how they've got the low-level guys who just need the money, the mid-level guys who are true believers, this is our pact, and then you got the top guys who are all talking to the FBI and stuff like that. That's what it's like with the ANCOMs. It's like the true believers are just the bit in the middle to keep people like us in check. The guys at the top have no illusions about how destructive and evil their ideology is, but they want to be destructive and evil, so that's great. And the people at the bottom don't really understand it. The people in the middle are just useful idiots, and they'll convince the masses, hopefully. And it's like they want it to be just this mob, so that the guys at the top who know how to control things and know how to be dictators and know how to be tyrants can then implement that, because no nation could organize, like, nothing could ever well, maybe not ever, but nothing could conquer America. Nobody could just go and occupy America because it's too well organized. To an extent, the United Kingdom as well. It's too well organized. Now, if you were to make that a disorganized just group of people who happen to speak the same language with no government, well, that's a different story. You could have the Soviets land and take over really quite easily.
Yep. But yeah, well, that's another thing. You can have different countries being able to take over things. That's the reasons why a lot of these communists and socialists say that socialism and communism never works, is because they're always invaded. That didn't seem to really work with Venezuela and a couple of others, but you know that's the general point that they come out with. That, oh, they were invaded or they were interfered with. It's like, yes, because your system produces that. It makes it open like that. I still think that people that try to go that we need open borders are really not understanding the process and reasons why we have countries. The reason why we have countries is so that those countries, like a household, can look after the people that's in it. And yes, those households are run slightly differently. But yeah, they're the best households that you can run to. Hence, that's the reason why you're here and haven't moved. It's like a child that won't move away from their mom and dad. They're arguing with them all the time, but yet don't want to leave because they get everything for free. I never understood people that push that narrative that, oh, we need to push away from the place that we're getting everything for free from. We need to destroy it and tear it down. It's not working properly for anybody. Really? So why are you here?
Well, yeah, the starry-eyed idealists, they want to funnel everybody in because they believe that, they believe that open borders are a good thing and they don't think any more about it. And then if they start to think more and more about it, they realize that it's a source. That's what I mean, is like they go up a rank and they realize, wait, this is a source of destabilization. And then it becomes explained to them, yeah, but we need the destabilization to overthrow the evil government. So, you know what I mean? It's like the more they look into it, they generally stop at a certain level because it's all about emotions. But if they do, because there are people who are very analytical who become socialists, the more analytical they are, the higher they get up the ranks, and the more basically nasty they become, or they get the hell out of there. Because they realize it's a source of. I mean, it's quite a despicable thought.
Whoa.
What happened?
We've got a little bit of an echo. I'm guessing the Moz has opened up both the chat and the microphone. Was it me?
Sounds great over here. I'm no sound issues here. I mean, I didn't hear an echo as far as that goes.
I imagine you did.
How about when I'm speaking?
No, carry on, Moz. I believe Ogre wanted to remind us where we were going rather than actually going down the idea of open borders.
Yeah, I was making a point.
I think it's a very good point as well. What the fuck happened there?
So, in the end, what is it that's keeping you all from moving forward?
Somebody knocking on my door.
Uh-oh. It's a Gestapo, man. I know it. It's fucking it. It's going to go on stream. We're going to hear it in the background, dude. This is going on stream. I'm going to play it by play. Oi, common sense guy. Oi, going to jail, mate. And it'll be like, next thing you know, it'd be like Count Dankula. You'll see him on the cover of the Sun, freeze frame, with them funky cuffs they put on y'all. Yeah, they let you keep your hands
put the truncheon there.
Well, and they let you, no, please, not up the back door, not again. But they put those cuffs on you that your hands can stay in front of you, and they want to make you feel like that's better than the American way of like putting them behind you, which I don't think either is good. But I mean, look at those things. You can't. They're really debilitating because you can't move your wrists. So to move out like this, even think about it, try it, do it. You'll see the wrist turn. If those switches are locked in, I'm not saying you can't go like this and try to choke somebody, but they have that cuffed anyway. That's just a horrible thing.
That's what you deserve for streaming without a streaming license, isn't it?
Yes, of course, isn't it? And I think of I think of the Vogons, from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Every time
I read any poetry.
No, I think right. Because it's just like, son of a bitch, man. How can these people here? They take an oath. I don't know if they do that there, and we'll get back to the thing as soon as we find out if common sense guy's still alive. Well, the police officers, in fact, all public service of that kind of caliber, take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And do they do anything like that there in England or in the UK? I mean,
yeah, there is an oath to protect the people. I'm not sure what it's called off the top of my head. I'm sure
Britain doesn't really have a constitution, though. Like the thing was that we were two hands off for our because it was a relatively new law, and then you had
your internet is shit.
Law.
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Domo. It's going to hell. Where's common
now next on the list?
Yeah, now they got yeah. You're there. You said we heard hello.
We've got them.
All right, save the show. Save the show.
I was listening. We don't have a constitution.
Well, I know now. Whenever I say that too, I know that you don't have a constitution, but see, when an officer swears that, they imply that they're going to make sure that your Fourth Amendment right, your right to be safe against illegal searches and seizures is going to be upheld, that your freedom of speech, your right to bear arms, that's what they're saying. And so, I mean, you could have another. I was just asking if they like when they go to be cops, do they just have a badge like you're a Vogon now, or do they have some ritual they go through?
No, they have an oath and they take it very seriously. It's quite hard on the cops, the current situation, because they take what they do really, really seriously. But they are beholden to their bosses, who are beholden to the legal system, which should be independent of the government, but it isn't. And they should be independent of the courts, but they're not. And it's like,
well, they should just admit that they should just admit that they're not keeping their oath anymore and just have them stop doing it. That's how I feel about cops here. I mean, if you're going to do things that it's like, oh, but we got the bad guy. You got the bad guy by breaking every law in the book. That makes you the bad guy. Can't you see that in a real world? Some quote unquote bad guy, a lot of these bad guys were breaking arbitrary laws put in by legislators that were just one thing was legal one day, next day it wasn't legal. We all could probably guess what some of those things are, but I'm not going to convolute up the LBP with us. Anyway, how about that Brexit? I don't know if y'all will get out. I used to, when it first happened, I thought you'd be out in 2 weeks. And now at this point, 2 years later, I'm thinking we're going to keep on the thing, man. I mean, how can you want another vote before you've even done the thing? It's all something to me. So What else, other than the International Monetary Fund and wanting a one world central bank and a one world government? What other reasons would there be to keep this thing together and try to have everybody?
It would also be the funding that the MPs and lords actually get, as well as businesses and concessions that all the businesses get from the EU as well.
Yeah, it's welfare.
Yes, very much so.
Scale.
Very much so, to the point where farmers actually get paid for leaving their fields barren. In other words, not growing anything, and they get paid for it during the year because of their fields not being used, to make sure that they drive up demand, so other places can, like Portugal and places like that, can actually sell their produce. It's absolutely ridiculous. You've got somebody like Ken Clark, believe it or not, that owns his own estate, but because he gets concessions from the EU, in a technicality, the EU actually pays for his estate and his upkeeps of his land. Now, you tell me the reasons why Ken Clark doesn't actually want us to leave the EU. I cannot think why.
It's just a giant global pyramid scheme.
And we all know how they end. Everybody falls on top of the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a global pyramid, as in the Illuminati. The Illuminati.
Well,
he said
before we move on to that wonderful imaginative world, CSG, I want to add a point to his point, which is this happens, right? These farmers who can't actually afford to keep the land they've got but will never sell it because it's been in their family for generations and they refuse to admit they can't keep it. They are crying out for subsidies so that they can keep their farms. And then people in this, particularly older people in this country, have the cheek to say that younger people won't do things like be farmhands and stuff anymore. It's not the case. There are no farmers giving out work. And when they do give out work, where do they go? Oh, that's right. They go over to the Eastern Bloc to pick up people to make them work for less than minimum wage.
Yeah.
And they manage to pull it off because they give them the minimum wage, but then they charge them for getting to work and they charge them for accommodation. So it works out at less than the minimum wage. And that's where this...
That sucks, man. My cousin runs a medium large farm over here of close to 4,000 acres, I believe. I might be overstating that by a little bit, 3,800 acres. And they have their farm hands are local boys. They get paid very well. They have benefits, the whole 9 yards. And but they, if they had their way, especially since they got rid of doing Roundup, they use real seeds, that are Roundup ready. They don't do any Roundup ready. They do. I'm not going to go through the crops they grow, but they grow quite a variety of different things. Man, since then, the hate, they'll close them down if they can.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why we don't have any farm hands anymore. It's literally as what CompuPoint's actually been saying. It's a simple.
No, it just sucks about the labor thing, man. So they import here. It in some places in the United States, it would be a lot of from south of the border. In fact, when we had before Roundup, I remember in the 80s where the fields, there's still remnants around here where there were migrant workers. And most of them people were from South America. They all spoke Spanish, but they came, did a great job at what they did, and they left. And yeah, they were hoeing weeds. They got one lump sum and divided it amongst 100 of them. You know what I mean?
No, that's fair enough. That's the way that they dealt with things. But I think the thing that we're trying to say is that because the EU is giving the farmers subsidies, it stops local growth. It stops people from actually earning a wage. And even though you do have the Eastern people coming in, it's a case of
stop that.
But that's the thing, because of freedom of movement, we can't stop them. And because freedom of movement, it's legal for them to be able to do it. And because they're putting them on their land, that they're able and allowed to deduct their wages direct from payment. So that's exactly the reason why CompuPoint has said what he said, that they're getting paid $7.60 or $7.80 an hour, but then they're getting taken out of their wages of fibre because of accommodation and travel.
So they're working for less than minimum wage, but it's more than they would have made in Poland. So they're being exploited, and then the farmers get what they need. They also get lots of welfare. They also get lots of subsidy. And meanwhile, the people who actually live around the farm have not worked on a farm for more than a generation. So none of the kids know how farm work works. They have no work ethic. They don't know how to travel. They can't be in a field all day without getting sick. It's like it cuts the bottom right out of the local society, and it's really crazy to see, especially in agricultural areas traditionally, because they're not agricultural anymore. They're just council estates with trees.
Basically, yeah. So I mean,
and so to get back to Ogre's point about the actual Brexit, well, it's corrupt from the bottom to the top, because the people at the bottom want the welfare, and then they know the civil servants, and the civil servants know the MPs, and the MPs know the EU people, and right up to your International Monetary Fund evil bastards. It's like from bottom to top, it's the same mentality and the same conversations and backhanders being done.
Well, if we're going to use a pyramid scheme as the form of analogy, I would actually say that the pyramid is actually flipped over. I would say that the point is at the bottom and the mass amount is at the top, so it goes like that and down. The reason why I say that is because all the pressure is on the common person, common man, and everything else that is above the common man is fine. It doesn't matter, and everybody else is earning money, while the common man is losing everything. So I think the pyramid scheme is completely reversed.
Yeah, and Ogre said that he thought that Brexit would be done in 2 weeks. Now, this is the interesting thing, is that I never thought Brexit would mechanically actually happen. I didn't, but I was just so happy that the vote was won, because I was happy about it for the same reason that they've gone ballistic about it. You know, it's Brexit derangement syndrome. It's a subset of Trump derangement syndrome. And the fact that we were able to get the leave vote, despite the fact that the entire media was against it, all the politicians were against it, and most of the bought and paid for welfare dependent businesses were against it, and we still got it through with a decent majority, the biggest in history, biggest vote in history. That was an amazing thing to happen. So that shows you that the change is on for the better in the minds of people, if not for in politics.
Would this be a good time to thank Putin for that?
Aye, give him a thank.
Yes. Now I can remove his truncheon from my friendly posterior. I think I can say thank you very much, Mr. Putin. You're able to do lots of help for us and be able to make us win Brexit. I salute you, sir. And that payment for me becoming a Russian bot, thank you very much, sir. I would much appreciate it.
I would also be interested in anyone that got to vote. What influenced them? I mean, for me, it was a YouTuber. It had nothing to do with the actual Leave campaign, and it had nothing to do really with the actual Remain campaign. I ignored them because I knew they were going to lie, and I sought out my own sources.
I did that to an extent. I mean, I didn't use YouTube too much. I used actual sites at that point in time, because none of them were actually biased at that point. They were just factual, because they didn't know that the referendum was going to happen, so that they didn't have a chance to actually rectify anything. So I was able to look at everything beforehand and see how that they moved from Frankfurt to Brussels and Brussels to Frankfurt twice in a week, spending £3.5 million each time they move. I was able to see that the fact that England or the UK themselves have never won any amendment or any issue when it comes to the European Union when they have voted against the EU. Not one. Not, oh, there's 98% or 97%. Every time that we've gone against the EU, we have not won. We've also abstained a lot of times because we knew we wouldn't win. But people always put that into the statistic and say that, oh no, we also abstained as well. It's like, yeah, because we wouldn't win. We knew, that's why we didn't vote. I think that people always come up with statistics. Oh yeah, but when we voted with the EU, we won 100% of the time. No, we actually won 98% of the time, because even sometimes the rest of the EU voted against the EU. Surprisingly. But even that, we still didn't win all the time. So when people actually come out and actually say, where did you get your information from? I looked for mine, like I always have done, and I always tell everybody to do. Find your own sources, read up, make your own decision. Because the more that you trust what comes out of mainstream media, the more that you trust that comes out of politicians' mouths, is the time when you know that you're being lied to. Brexit means Brexit. We're a strong and stable government. That didn't work very well, did it?
No, I think you're right. The question was simple. I think most people understood it. They just won't accept the answer.
I agree. Well, actually, no, I disagree. Sorry, I actually disagree with that. I think it's a minority of people that are actually disagreeing with the government on what's going on. I think around about 6.5 million of those people are living in London. I think the rest of the country's already said, don't really care. Let's just get on with it. They voted Brexit, and I'm actually democratic. I think people that are in big cities like London and Birmingham, for instance, they're the ones that are stopping us from actually having a Brexit.
Yeah, and activism has become a sport now as well. Like if Glastonbury's cancelled, you'll get people protesting. You know what I mean? Like it's not about anything. And well, protests get news cameras and unless it's a protest to free Tommy Robinson, and you know the news cameras get sent to politicians with the footage, and the politicians vote accordingly. You know, it's like the thing with me to answer Moz's question was it was as early as 2009. I was watching Question Time. Nigel Farage came on, never heard of him. I don't think I even knew what the EU was, particularly. And he was talking about how all our high streets were dying. Wasn't even the EU he was talking about. And he was the least politically correct person on the panel, but also the most polite. And he talked sense, and he was talking about how the high streets were dying. And I was living in a dump at the time where the high street was indeed dying. And I was like, you know what? This guy has some fantastic points, and I've never heard anybody speak about them. So I went and looked him up. What's the EU? Looked that up. UKIP, all that sort of stuff. Thought, well, it can't be as one-sided as that. Looked up the pro-EU stuff. Found out they were a load of rabid identitarians, and thought, well, no, actually it is. And I never really changed my opinion. I looked for new information, but I didn't change my opinion from about 2010 onwards. But I did look for new information. I did test myself all the time.
It also may be worth noting that it's just occurred to me that when I'm talking about this whole subject, generally, I'm actually only talking about the people that voted, the people that voted Leave and the people that voted Remain. I'm not generally including the people that didn't vote. So there's a whole nother set of people there as well. I'm just talking about the results.
Yeah, this is an unpopular opinion of mine as well, but I reckon that if you're going to take action as the state and people don't vote, that should actually count as a no.
No, I agree with that.
I don't. You can never get 100% of people to vote all the time. That means if you get 99% under your logic, that means we can't go forward with democracy.
Good.
Democracy would hold. No, democracy would hold. I mean, I know you say good as with the ideas of what's going on at this moment in time, but democracy in itself is the best form of leadership that we have. Let's go back to monarchy, shall we? Let's go back to monarchy. Let's go back to a dictatorship. Let's go back to authoritarianism. I didn't think anybody would want to go to that. Democracy is the best form that we have, and just because people don't vote, that's their choice.
Oh yeah, no, because I spoil my ballots and stuff all the time. I was being flippant, but on a serious note, I think that what you do about this, you can decide at the time. But I think that those who don't vote should be taken into account because, for example, I think only a third of the country vote in a general election or something like that. Now, to me, that says
it's normally around about 65 to 69%
that vote.
For general elections, generally, yes.
Right.
It's higher at this point, but generally it's 65 to 69.
So, no, I've got it backwards. It's a third don't vote, right?
Yeah.
So what you've got the government of the day, which means that a third of the country voted against that government and a third of the country didn't vote for them. And the thing is that I believe in the social contract in the sense of social. I don't believe that the social contract extends to the state. I believe that it extends among people, but I don't believe that it extends to the government because the government can be anybody. And, you know, if the government isn't serving you, then I think you're within your rights to fucking form a new one, basically. And the thing is that if 2/3 of the country have decided that, you know, Theresa May shouldn't be Prime Minister or Jeremy Corbyn shouldn't be Prime Minister, you've got a problem on your hands, I think. A constitutional problem because, you know, the person's only got in because 1/3 of the people living there voted for them. That's not the majority, is it? I mean, and if you don't vote, then that might be a protest because as common sense is saying, you don't know why they've not voted. It might not be that they had the thumb up their arse, and it's difficult to vote. It's on the one day you've got to be there at a certain time or between certain hours, and you've got
to... general elections are normally run over a course of either a whole weekend or a whole week.
Yeah, but like it's a bureaucratic thing, and you've got to play by their rules.
They're not run for a whole week. They're not run for a whole week. They'll run for about 3 days.
In some ways, I'm of the opinion, whether it's right or wrong, and whoever I'm disagreeing or agreeing with, I'm of the opinion that if it's well advertised that there's a question out in the country that we all should be interested in an answer, if on the day only 3 people turn up and 2 vote to remain, they're the winners.
No, there's actually especially for referendi, there is a legislation in place that says that there needs to be above a 36 or 39% of the population to vote. If it falls underneath that population percentage, regardless of the way that the vote goes, it has to be run again and more people have to vote.
Yeah, common sense. That's kind of what I was getting at with general elections, is I think that should apply to the government who is in power. They should have won by that at least. Or there has to be a recount, basically. Like, that's why I hate first past the post.
Well, I kind of like first past the post because it gives a final definition and gives a final post. But I do actually like the idea of the way, I'm not saying it because they're French, because I hate the French. I don't. But
Are we going down the communism route again?
No. We're not going to say that we need full-on communism. We're not going to say it this time. But with the French, they have a form of many political parties that they all start off. They do 2 rounds. So you do 2 rounds of political parties. They have around about 30 parties or something like that, or at least more than 10. Admittedly, there's probably something around about a 3-party system, to be honest, out there, centrist, right and left. But generally, they do it as the 3 that get through the 2 that get through the highest amount of votes get through to the second round. And with that second round, they have to do a recount, and they also have to do another election. So their elections go on for a week, but they have 2 rounds. I think that would be a better way of doing it, because then you actually find out who actually wins, and you get a chance for people to go, okay, well, it's between the Conservatives and Labour again. Let's go off and do this and actually vote for somebody we know is going to actually win, or who we want to out of the 2. I think that makes a hell of a lot more sense than the way that we do it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Maybe it's just the way that I actually said it. I didn't really explain it too well. But no, I do like that idea, the way of having a 2-round system. So say, for instance, you wanted to put your vote as, I don't know, a flippant spit in the eye to the Conservatives, so you voted for UKIP. But because you've done that, the Conservatives and Labour have got relatively the same amount. Now you come to a second round and you go, well, I don't really want Labour in, but now I've got a second chance to vote, I want to put Conservatives in, or vice versa. You get that chance to have that protest vote, but then at the same time vote on the proper issues. I think that makes a hell of a lot more sense than a 1-tier system.
Yeah, I think that, like, my issue with democracy is, this is what's at the root of it, is the actual voting system itself, because the British government obviously changes depending on who's sitting where. You know, like, you get a different party in and out, right? But the whole structure of it is predetermined. Like, so you're playing their game by their rules. You don't get a real say in it. You just get the 2 puppets dangled before you, and you've got to pick one. You don't get the option of saying, well, actually, I would rather do it a completely different way. So, like, the whole civil service, Westminster, the building, all the old laws, the court system, like, yeah, okay, you can choose who sits in the chair and gives the orders, but you have to accept that entire massive system, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I find that quite tyrannical personally, because, well, we've seen how it's led, where it's now basically led to a situation where that institution or series of institutions can ignore the will of the people that put it there, which they're doing. And there is no system in this country that allows for any kind of, I'm not saying like uprising as in a violent one, but any kind of uprising, or any kind of like independent body moving in and saying, hey, this isn't on, you guys better get on with this. There's nothing there. There's no independent voice.
You mean a form of impeachment, of being able to dissolve
something, anything, yeah.
Well, yeah, you're not even allowed to talk back nowadays.
No, we know that.
But do you get what I'm saying? Because it's a really abstract idea, and I struggle to explain it.
I was just going to quickly elaborate. I do actually get what you're saying. The fact is, in our system at least, the UK system, it's a case of we cannot disillusion or disavow or disinvolve or disvolve. I'll get the right word eventually, dissolve government or government process. Because,
yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually need that. We need that power back to the people to be able to go, no, we don't trust you as a government. We want you to be dissolved from government so that we can have parliament, then have a general election so that we can then form another government.
Yeah, and if you look back through British history, we are moving in the right direction with this, but we're at a very, very important fork in the road here, because the House of Commons was originally only comprised of 12 people. It was the King's Court. You maybe know this already. The barons got so fucked off with the king choosing the courtiers all the time that they said, no, we get to choose half of them, or you don't get to use our men in your army. So that's what the House of Commons and the House of Lords was, but it was all the King's Court. And then,
at that point, it was actually the barons.
Yeah, continuing that on until today, where we've got it's the people in principle.
Yeah.
That is a great step in the right direction, but we need to keep it tipping in that direction, or they will just claw it back.
Oh, no, of course I do. I mean, that's the thing with any sort of form of government. You look at the way that the US is at the minute, for instance, with this all this hoorah about trying to get rid of the First Amendment so that they can have forms of hate speech, so they can be arrested for putting people away for what they say, is ridiculous. But they're still trying to do it, as you quite rightly say, as an example, trying to strip away your rights and your amendments in America to be able to put their own authoritarian control over it again. The same thing as we're trying to take away guns. Whether you think that it's the sole reason why people go off and shoot, or whether you think that there's another reason, maybe something like mental illness, for instance, that makes people go off and shoot. That doesn't matter on that issue. It matters about the process of why the Second Amendment was written, and to make sure that the government cannot rule over you.
Yeah.
That's the way that it is to make sure the citizenry is able to not necessarily overthrow its government, but is able to fight back its government from a tyrannical point. Now, we can't do that. We have people like London Lord Mayor of fucking Sadiq Khan, fucking deciding that it's a really good idea for people to get stabbed and shot, and he's still going across to America to deliver speeches about diversity. Because apparently diversity is more important than 50-something people that died in London within the first fucking 3 months of this year.
Oh, yes. Affirmative action trumps human life every time. Did you not know that?
I did not know that. But then again...
Well, that's your diversity training for the day, CSG. You just meditate on that one.
Yeah, I'm going to say, fuck that.
The thing is, though, that I don't want to mention the Illuminati thing yet, because Ogre was going to talk about that and he's muted himself. But I'll keep with your point for now. Like you say, that you've got this corrupt mayor, right? And he was put there, you would think, by the people. But the thing is, he's not serving the interest of the people. But there's no recourse. There's no way of getting rid of him without violence, which you can't do as a good citizen. You know what I mean? Like they push you into this corner, where it's like, right, I want to be a good citizen, I want to be non-violent, and I want to be participating in national affairs. But I don't want to be anything to do with the system of Westminster, and in my case as well, Holyrood. I don't want anything to do with either of those systems. No, there's no real avenue other than like charity left open to people like that. And then, it gets to the stage where if things got really bad, the only options you would have would really be violence or capitulation. And it shouldn't ever get to that stage. But I think what's happened with the EU is it feels like there's a really old attitude to government, like a really old attitude, like this, like this top-down thing.
Conservative, communistic type of government.
Yeah, like the real old paradigms. And I'm saying like 100 years old. Like really go back to like early Victorian and before. That's the way they look at people and how they're to be governed. Whereas the new way of thinking is like, well, no, the working class, for instance, are perfectly capable of governing themselves. Thank you very much. We just need an administration, and to organize it rather than actually rule it. And I think that's a fight between those two ideologies. Personally, I don't know what you think of that.
I think it's always going to be a point of that. You've got basically three classes of people, or I would put them into. You've got people that don't mind being led. People that just want an easy life, that don't really care what's going on. You then have the middle class of what I call a class or type of person that wants to lead, that has always a problem with how the leaders are running things, but doesn't quite want to take over, doesn't quite want to run for office, doesn't quite want to do anything to change it. So they moan, they bitch, they decide that everything that the government does is bad or who the leaders are is bad. But then you have the third tier, which is the leaders. The ones that think they are either doing something good, which is nigh on impossible nowadays, or the second half of that is people that are just doing it for money and for the ideas of just trying to better themselves. And I think that's the tiers of humanity that we have to fight against ourselves to be able to see. A lot of people say that Marx was completely and utterly crazy. I say that with the idea of Marxism in itself, we do have to collectively evolve our game plan on that. We have to remember that people themselves have to inherently try to help each other. I'm not trying to say that I think that communism or socialism is a good thing by any stretch of the imagination. I'm really bloody not.
No, you're just saying why it's appealing to people.
Yes.
Those words are appealing to people. They just don't understand what that means.
Exactly. Because it's the idea of realizing that people have to change their own personalities and their own evolution to be able to try and help themselves help other people. And I think people forget that. It's why the idea of individualism is such a strong, powerful force. Because once you get over the idea of the selfishness of the concept, it's a case of if you empower that individual with those rights and you make it a universal right for the individual, that means you are classed as an individual as well, which means you get them rights as well. And I think the power of collectivism is the idea of people cannot understand or fathom the idea of individualism or individual power. And it's a case of if you give me the power to be able to have all the rights under the sun and you write it down that individuals are allowed this, that means every individual has the same right as I do, regardless of what I say about it.
Yeah, and you know, I think you've led me too neatly to the point about the Illuminati thing, right? You've got two ways. You know how you've got that symbol of the eye at the top of the pyramid?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful metaphor for the two systems that we're talking about, right? Because you've got the people like them, you know, the Illuminati types. They believe that the pyramid is us, and it's the same from bottom to the top, and that they are the eye at the top that needs to you know, is above the pyramid itself. They are better, right? And they believe that that's them and the pyramid is us. Whereas what people like us believe, that the eye at the top of the pyramid is everyone. Like that pyramid and the eye is inside every person on the planet. And that we have to become the eye at the top of the pyramid. Whereas what they believe is that they can't look at that individualistically. They have to look at it as the world is the pyramid and they're the eye on the top, if that makes sense.
Is that a way of drawing us into their beliefs? Is that just a way of saying to us, it's all about you?
I think so. I think it's a perversion of, because that symbol has held on for a reason. It's an eternal symbol. And it speaks to people on a deep level, and that's why they've bastardized it. Because
it's been around since Egyptian times, hasn't it? It's supposed to be the all-seeing eye of Set or Seti, or
it's the Eye of Horus.
That's the one. The sun god.
Yeah. You've got Ra Horus, which is a combination of the reincarnated Osiris and Ra. Basically, it's a weird. It depends which part of Egyptian mythology you're reading. The myth changes, but yeah, it's the Eye of Horus that he had to sacrifice and give back to Osiris so that the Egyptian state could rise again. And Horus is depicted as a shapeshifter between a man and a falcon, because if you're
some
flying above everything
conspiracy in there, are we
everything.
going back to when the aliens helped the Egyptians create the world?
Well, no.
To try and mine some gold out of the pyramids and power their ships magnetically from the magnetosphere and the ionosphere.
Yeah, I knew it.
Well, there's a thing though that with the Illuminati thing, I've got a thing from a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy, and I'm not entirely sure what I make of this book, but it's very fun. And it was detailing how Adam Weishaupt of the Illuminati, when it was basically dissolved, assuming it dissolved, it founded another organization called the League of Just Men. And if you look at their manifesto, it's word for word the Communist Manifesto, but something like 50 years earlier in 1786. And then they approached Marx and got him to basically rewrite it and call it socialism. So the reason that the collectivists, like these Illuminati types and these communisty types, say so many of the same things is because if that passage is to be believed, they're the same organization effectively.
Yeah, I don't actually disbelieve that at all. You can quite easily see similarities in the idea of the collectivism, as in we need to be one world to be able to help everybody.
Yeah, and it's an eternal symbol, but it's also an eternal desire of, an eternal struggle of how easy would it just be even for people like us to go, you know what? Instead of working to be the best person I can, I'm just going to work to be one of them. Like, I'll just work to get on the gravy train. Fuck everybody. There are people who are better than other people, and those people should be at the top, and it's that simple. It's a really easy attitude to succumb to.
Unfortunately, I see it on a daily level where some people are just not interested in this stuff. They're not asking the questions about why is Brexit, should I remain, should I leave? And I speak to so many people that when I tell them stuff about, oh, we shouldn't do this, then they're just, oh no, I'm not interested. And I wonder how much of it is, as a mass populace, as the peasants, how much of it is our own fault for not being engaged in this kind of stuff. And I was there once too, so I'm not trying to sound wonderful.
No, see, I'd agree with you in part, but I think the reason for why people don't want to engage is not because they don't want to engage or because they're selfish or because they just don't care. I think it's a case of once you start going down a rabbit hole, you realize that you're not in control of what you are doing. You realize that the government are not this all-power entity that's going to be able to help and make you survive no matter what. You realize that everything is just human-made and human-orientated. You realize the fact that you're not ordained, you're not protected. You are just you on your own there to protect your family. I think once people start realizing that, and people want, some people do want to do that, some people don't. As soon as you start talking to somebody that's going to challenge their beliefs, they shut themselves down from it. Because what's ignorance if it's not bliss?
Yeah, I was definitely there once.
I find that it's the Matrix, with the blue pill, red pill thing, made the good analogy of like, if I'm in the dark room and there's people bumping me about, I want to be able to switch the goddamn light on, no matter how scary the people look, and that's my issue with it. And there's people out there who just would rather not know. But I think the other thing is, I try and be as forgiving toward people as I can, because I used to be a crappy misanthrope bastard, so I did, and I'm kind of trying to soften up towards people because I think that the harsher I am on people, I'm in no position to be judgmental of people. Basically, is my opinion, and so I need to stop judging them. And I'm trying to look at it more a case of, if you even just look at this EU argument, without the conspiracy stuff added in, just the EU argument on its own, it's so bloody complicated. It's so, like, we have a political system and a society now that is so sophisticated that if you've not been moving with the times, you're fucked. Like, trying to get a handle on a political system at the age of 20, 29 or something must be impossible. I only know this stuff so fluently because I've been interested in it since I was 10 because I'm a freak. Like, it's really difficult, and that's without all the Illuminati shit and the communists preaching these lovely sentences that actually mean the opposite of what they say, and all that crazy confusing stuff. That's before you even get to that stuff. So no wonder people can't get involved.
I've only been interested in politics for about 3 years. Since I was about 28, 29.
Yeah, but you had to really apply yourself. Like, you had to seriously apply yourself.
Not particularly. I didn't really apply myself. Most of my politics is described on, well, the namesake, obviously. Most of my politics is described from the ideas of common sense and liberalism. Yeah, okay. I've done some research on particular issues and things like that, but most of my research, most of my argumentation is always devised from the point of a liberal point of view with a dash of common sense in there. That's always the way that my worldview's been. It's just I've been so pissed off with the way that politics has been run recently and how governments in themselves try to push forward this narrative that they're here to help, but yet when you tell them what you want them to do, they still go against the narrative of what the people tell them. And I think a lot of people are slowly waking up. And I know a lot of people go, oh, well, Labour are getting all the youth voters. That's not true at all. Labour are not getting all the youth voters at all.
Yeah, they're getting all the uni voters.
No, they didn't even get most of the uni voters. Not now. They won't get most of them, not now. They might get some of the new ones, but a lot of the ones that are there know that Labour promised to pay for their university fees. If Jeremy Corbyn has said or did say or suggested very heavily, don't want to get done for slander, that he was going to actually make sure that he was able to get rid of tuition fees. That was one of his statements. Yes, it was a suggestion, and it was a case of he said he would try, but that's heavily suggested to university students, so they voted for him.
Yeah, I know people that did that voted for him just based on that.
Yeah, and he completely and utterly lied. And the thing is, these students learn that. They will not vote for him again because they know he lied.
Now, what gets me is that, and we know that the universities are just indoctrination after your post-school indoctrination, but yeah, and you know it's nothing to do with education anymore. But the thing is, it always baffled me when these politicians come with, "Oh, we're going to pay your tuition fees from cradle to grave," blah blah blah. It's like, what's the price? No one ever asked that. Even since I was a kid, if anybody came to me with something, I'd be like, okay, what have I got to do in return for this, or what am I giving up if you're going to do it? Like, I don't know why people don't ask this. I don't know why people don't look at something that's very obviously too good to be true and don't go, right, what are you trying to do to swindle me here?
Have they just, is it to do with upbringing? Because I can remember, again, a long time ago when I was younger, I can remember my dad saying to me, if you clear out the shed for me because I want to de-ant it, I'll pay you for that. And I was like, yeah. So I cleared out the shed and he went, there you go, there's 20p.
I think that's a big part of it. I know Common Sense did a lot of work when he was younger as well.
Are people through universities and that not being taught that anymore? Are governments purposefully teaching, dumbing people down?
Well, it's the victim mentality, isn't it?
Well, no, if I may, it's parents. The thing is, when you were brought up, were you brought up in a single parent family or were you brought up with two loving parents?
Two fantastic parents.
There you go. I asked you the same question, Mr. Conklepoint.
Oh, two. Yeah, two then one.
That's the same as me. Do you know what all of us have in common? We were learned the value of hard work to begin with. I learned mine from working on the market with my dad from the age of 10. So I was up at 3 o'clock in the mornings. I was working and earning my money.
Yeah.
People that don't have a stable family, whether it's two mums, two dads, or mum and dad, or whatever, I'm not going to go into semantics on that one. But if you don't have two loving parents, it's a case of you will fail.
And how? Because I would say the governments have shaped it that way. I think we see it. There's the destruction of the nuclear family in a lot of countries. How have they managed to do that?
Well, the problem was that I think
if I may.
Sorry, go ahead. Common Sense, yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say that I don't think it's a case that government has shaped that policy. I think people shape that policy. Society shaped that policy for the idea of women wanting to do what they wanted to do, for the idea that women wanted to be single, they wanted to be able to control their children and child, and so on and so forth. And government voted in those policies. I think it was directly a stem from the people that wanted this. The only problem is that when they have their own freedom, they are the ones that are held accountable. But the problem is government and themselves especially don't hold themselves accountable. They blame everybody else.
So what you're saying is we never should have given women the vote?
No.
That was just a joke.
I know.
Making it clear for the stream.
Back before that, though, because remember there were two bloody world wars that our forefathers got sent off to be massacred in. And I think what happened was in the Victorian times where the church started to collapse in on itself, the government stepped in to fill that void, and nobody for a second actually went, wait, hang on, this isn't your place. Like, nobody went, no, the government is a material bureaucratic thing. It should not be filling the void of the spiritual. Nobody did that, and because they didn't, the state is all powerful. To question it is heresy, and it's doing much of the stuff that the church was doing, but the church was doing it not entirely, but semi-voluntarily. So, like, take your single mother's example, right? Well, what happens if you don't give single mothers money? Well, the kids die. That's what fucking happens. So the government's in a shit position of, they can't say no. And the society's in a shit position of nobody could part with the money to give to them personally. So the state does it, but because it's the state, it never gives that back. If the church couldn't afford to keep a soup kitchen open, they just have to shut the soup kitchen. It's that simple. If the government can't afford to keep a soup kitchen open, it goes and invades Iraq.
Or shifts higher taxes.
Or that, yeah. More 1%.
Yeah. See, I really like, I mean, you brought up the idea of should women have the vote? And obviously all of us would agree that yes, they should have the vote. That goes without saying. But I hate this idea that women 100 years ago in 1918 got the universal suffrage. They didn't get universal suffrage or even female suffrage or women to vote. They didn't even get that in 1918. They got that in 1928 with the rest of the men. Because people always forget the fact that the common man didn't get to vote until after 1928, until they come back from the Second World War. They forget that. And that when women and feminists especially aspire to this idea that, oh yeah, women fought for this and fought for that, yeah, okay, they did. But they also terrorize people by throwing things through bloody windows, setting people on fire, setting buildings on fire, should I say, and throwing themselves in front of carts and throwing themselves in front of horses and then wondering why they accidentally got trodden on.
Aye, somebody said to me, if you could, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? I said, no, I would go back in time and save Emily Pankhurst, though.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, I can understand that.
I'd also like to ask both of you it's about what I mentioned to you before, Mr. CSG, about the 1984 quote that those that control the past control the future, and those that control the present control the past. Because all of this lately just seems to be the same thing over and over again to me, that this is what they're doing to shape the world. And I'm still personally confused. Is it in the background? Is there Illuminati? I'm not so sure that's true anymore. Or is it the government's doing it? And why do you that?
Well, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure about the Illuminati type of stuff. I'm not too sure about.
Yeah, I'm moving away from that.
But even if there was such thing as the Illuminati, the ones that are at the front of it are our governments, and our governments are being led either by this Frankfurt Marxist schooling of feminism and the idea of controlling everything together and intersectionality, and has been able to push that narrative, and that narrative is now trying to change the aspects of what history, for instance, putting more black people in, say, the Roman army, for instance, actually in the army, not being slaves, but actually in the army, and being around in Britain and things like that. Now, I have no problem if that actually happened. That's fine, do that. But as far as we know, Romans didn't let people, unfortunately, that weren't Roman be part of the actual Roman legion. They were mercenaries instead.
In today's terms, one of the interesting things that I've noticed in the news lately is everyone thanking Nelson Mandela because of his 100th birthday or whatever it is, and very few people.
I was telling my father about that. The fact that
very few people mention what he did before.
Massive advocate for keeping apartheid going before he went to prison. He actually even was firebombing people. In fact, I believe the reason why he went to prison is because he almost killed somebody, or he did kill somebody. The only reason why his position changed is because while he was in prison, there was a white prison guard that was actually helping him out by giving him the paper after he finished his shift, the prison guard. And that was the only way Nelson Mandela could get the ideas of news on what was going on. And after that, he had a hell of a lot of change in his appearance and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that in the day and age we live in through media, they're not so much changing history and reshaping history, they're just missing parts out so that the future generations don't even know about it.
Well, a lot of history is entirely fictional, and then it endures because of the fucked education system. So they're already been doing it for years. You know, things like the Roman invasion of Britain didn't happen. But, you know, you can't say that, but because all the textbooks, you know, say that it happened. But, you know, all the textbooks are based on the theories of about two people, and the archaeological evidence doesn't match what they said. And that's not a conspiracy, by the way. That's been accepted now, but the history books have not yet basically caught up with that because our education system is so slow. So that's just something as innocuous as the Romans coming to Britain. Think about if it's something that actually matters. They're never going to let that out. And the thing is that history is so fictitious anyway that
It's
it's
written by
almost
the
not worth
victors.
studying. And that's why I'm kind of a big fan of, you know, the internet and news and finding your own sources and things like that. Because, like you said, it's the present that matters. So if we take the reverse of it, you can use the present to work out the past and decide the future, rather than, you know what I mean? Like, if you want to fight back,
Yeah, no,
don't try
that
don't try and find out what actually happened in the past. Try and find out what's happening in the
yeah.
present. Who's changing
What?
what in the present?
Well, not even that. Look, when you wake up tomorrow, look at what happens during your day and logically see how that applies to your life. But then we're under this dirty cloud that seems to be saying, "Oh no, that doesn't matter. Well, don't think about that." You know, how do we change that? That's the thing that worries me.
Yeah, I do love watching troublesome stories disappear suddenly from the news cycle as well. That's always
I could tell
interesting.
you a little. Can I just interject there? We're not actually discussing it today, but there was a story today where at my 10:30 break in the morning at work, it stated this one thing. Then within the story, it stated that the headline was not actually true, and this guy only did it for a certain specific reason, which worked. Then 3 hours later on my second break, that story was gone, and they were just using the headline of what that guy had already admitted was not true. And I thought, well, anyone that goes to that story now is going to think that's true. We'll discuss that another day, but it really, really interested me. And it was almost like they put up a disclaimer. So first of all, they put this story out with the truth in it, and then later on they put out their MSM bullshit, and then later on in the future when someone calls them up on it, they can go, actually, in the first place we did say that, you know. And but that's another story.
I do honestly feel, obviously, history is written by the victor. Obviously, that's the reason why when we have other people that come around and tell us certain things that are omitted from history, we do learn a hell of a lot. And people are learning all the time, obviously, as well, and trying to re-put what history was. The thing is with human history is the fact that it's human, it's flawed, it's biased. It has to be, unfortunately. And no, that's not me giving it credence to say that that's the way that it should be written, but that is the way it's written because it's written by humans. If it was able to be written by a computer, then all the facts and all the points would be written on each side. After all, if you were a Nazi and you were trying to fight the rest of Europe, and you wrote the reasons why you were fighting Europe was because you hated the Jews and you wanted to make sure that Europe paid for the way that it treated Germany after the Treaty of Versailles, you'd want to change that, wouldn't you? It's just the point that biasness always changes our perspective of what's going on. History is not a science, where science is a repeatable point that can be redone and reevaluated. History is a point that this happened, but you're either going to take my story of what happened, or you're going to take his story of what happened.
It makes me wonder. Sorry, carry on.
His story.
I was literally just about to say, after all, it is called his story.
You are a clever boy.
I know.
It makes me wonder who was the first person who was clever enough to be sitting there that thought to themselves, well, if I spin this yarn and this story, I can control people on, maybe I can control these 3 people, these 4 people, these, and isn't history a form of religion?
No, it's not. The reason why history is not a form of religion is because it's done by, even if it's infactually correct, the dates themselves are normally set either very close or are exactly when it happened. The facts may be omitted, like the reasons why they fought. But you have two armies that fought at this particular day, at this particular time. These amount of people died. These amount of people didn't. Those are facts. They can't be admitted from history.
In some ways, I think what I'm thinking of is like Homer's Odyssey, and I'm not saying I've ever read it, but I understand that it's rather than Homer having written it, it was a collection of ideas from various people that kind of formed a story.
No.
Yes, it's like an anthology in a sense, because the Greeks had this bizarre system where if you were a student of the person, you could write under their name and that passed on. So
but they also had a reading system that if you were a student, you were going to get fucked by the fucking teacher. But that doesn't mean that that was correct. And it doesn't mean that the rest of the Western world took it upon themselves to believe it.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was a good system at all, because it means that we don't know who actually wrote what. But I'm just explaining that it was like a collaborative thing. So if you consider it like Plato, for instance, became almost like a university, if you will, in that a lot of the stuff written by Plato is more like the publishing house called Plato rather than the man himself. Same with Socrates and all that. But with the history example, I a lot of this is again like trying to kind of not lead the conversation back, but link this point back to the Brexit question. It's all to do with government and power and, like you said, controlling the present to control the past, blah, blah, blah. Now, one of the ways they do that, again, is through the education system, because I remember being taught, and I questioned this, and I dropped the course as a result in high school. We were doing history, and I was being asked to write something that I knew to be factually inaccurate, and I could prove it was factually inaccurate. But my source was not a primary source, which is to say it was not a source written at the time. And I said to the teacher, well, why is a lie written at the time more important than a piece of factual information written today? And they didn't have an answer for me and just told me to write the fucking thing, at which point I told them to shove the class and I was going to go and do biology instead. And that baffled me, because you've got all these people coming out of school and they're not just studying something innocuous like the Plantagenets or ancient Egypt. They're studying World War II. And they are being told, no, that lie I just told you, despite the fact it's a lie, is the truth because it was written at the time. I don't care what evidence you have that says it's false. And that's how you get rewarded. You get your A by doing that.
Well, that's how those that control the present, our governments, the world organisations, control the past and reshape our future.
So that's what I mean, though. That's how it would be impossible to do without the education system, because the education system primes your arsehole for the media, and the media does the rest, and then you go and do your job and vote for the correct politicians, and that's how it would be impossible to do without the education system.
Yeah.
I have to completely and utterly disagree. The reason why I disagree is not on everything. I do feel that on certain aspects of history, it is a case of some people and a lot of people go on consensus rather than actual factual evidence. To do juxtaposition, or to use it as an analogy, it would be a case of, how do you reckon history is going to be written by what's happening now? Do you think history is going to be remembered by the feminists, or do you reckon it's going to be remembered by the people that were fighting the feminists? To either of you.
Well, it just depends. Like you say, it just depends who wins. Because I heard this fun phrase. It's not that history is written by the victor; it's written for the victor. In that it's written to justify what the victor did to become the victor. And I quite like that.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
That's what it'll be. But because it was to do with the Plantagenets,
Yes.
the Tudor guy, I can't remember. Is it Richard Henry Tudor, the first one? He had to justify what he'd done to become the king of England, and he had to justify it on paper. And that's it. Wasn't a case of he was trying to control the future. He was trying to say to people, "Hey, look, I did this for the right reasons. You know, please don't cut my head off," basically. But now it's gotten to this stage where they've realised that worked so well that they've gone to the Moz doctrine of, hey, hang on, we can use this to shape reality, basically.
I think the world's been constructed in a manner, for whatever reason, just through coincidence or whatever. But as much as it's the same as it is today, there seems to be two different groups of people that have two different views on what reality is. There's one side that thinks reality is this. There's another side that thinks reality is that, and there's no meeting place in the middle where people can talk it out and decide what reality actually is.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I actually asked that question was to continue a point. The reason why I asked that question was that it would be for the fact that from the 90s all the way up to 2017, 18, possibly even up to 2020, it'd be a case the feminists would have won. So it'd mean that the feminists would have been winning. So they would be writing history. Now, that doesn't mean that the history themselves that they are writing is completely incorrect. It just means that it's biasly skewed towards them. But the only problem with history now, is that it's a case of you have too many mediums that are reporting on all of the same stuff. Where back in historical times, you either burnt the history, you destroyed the other person's history and lineage, or it was a case of it was just lost in time. Now we have so much history that it's a case of, or so much work that will show our history that it will not be able to be misconstrued anymore. That's the reason why I say history is not a religion. History is a case of what is written and is recorded by the people that win. And no, that doesn't give it the right or credence to say that that's the way it should be done. It's just the way that it is done, but it's not a religion. There is no way that history is a form of religion.
And bringing it back to Brexit, it seems to be the decision was you're either on one side or the other. Nobody wanted to discuss the middle again.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We have lost our centrist points. We have lost that being able to meeting a meld of minds. We are so separated by identity politics. Now, if you were to say to me that I think politics is a religion, I would snap your hand off and say, yes, it fucking is.
Politics is a religion.
Yes, it is.
The thing with history as well is you've got to differentiate between the discipline and the sort of the institution of it. So the discipline of history is just being a student of the past, effectively. There's nothing wrong or insidious or ideological about that. But the institutions that govern what is and is not history and then teach that, that's a different matter entirely. And that is very cultish and bordering on mysticism, in my opinion. And it's a political entity. And so to link it back to what Common Sense just said, politics is most assuredly religious, in the bad sense. I'll say cultish because I don't think religion is necessarily a bad thing. Politics is definitely a cult, and history is a political entity now because of the education system, in my opinion. And I mean the higher education system too. I mean university. And then the people come out of university and they write the history books. So it's this incestuous system that does what Moz said. But like I said to you, they try to control the present, to control the past, to control the future. Well, that's how you undo them. You just look at what they're doing in the moment. Is what they're saying matching what they're doing now? You don't need to work out the whole history of the universe. Just right now, does it match? Well, no. Okay. Now you know not to trust them or to trust them, depending on
I understand your premise and I understand your point. The only problem is with that premise and point, there's a case of, okay, you've proven that they are wrong at this moment in time, that they are factually incorrect. Does that mean by guilt of association you are suggesting that everybody else throughout the whole of history and all out of time, now I would agree with you in your premise, but proving it is fucking hard, would you say that they are all writing for their own purposes? And could you prove that they're all writing for their purposes?
Well, I wouldn't try. I would just say where I was coming from with that question was because of what Moz said earlier, mainly about people not getting involved enough, and how there's all this history and there's all even in just the EU, right? 30 years of EU history is a lot of fucking reading, and because people, that's what they like to do. They like to argue about these little niggly things and kick it off into the long grass, like the European arrest warrant or something, as if that matters, well, let's ignore sovereignty for a moment and talk about the arrest warrant. That's a lot of history you have to read up on to know your shit about the EU. That's not like human history. That's just 30 years worth, right? So to get into it, people find that incredibly intimidating and difficult. So whoever makes it easiest for them, the media generally, they make a nice story that makes kind of sense and is appealing, and people swallow it. So the best way, I think, for people to get sort of, well, if you'll excuse the expression, red pilled without having to, you know, live in a library for 3 years is to do what I said. So it's not a case of like I believe everybody in history has written things with absolutely no interest in just preserving the history. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that if you want to actually get people into it, that's probably the best thing to get them to do, because it is incredibly intimidating to get started. But once you see that you've been lied to by somebody repeatedly, you can go, right, you're not to be trusted, move on to the next source. And then once you find one you can trust, or if it doesn't have to be a source itself, it could be a way of thinking, it could be a value system, anything. Like you would describe yourself as kind of a liberal in the traditional sense.
Technically, I'm a libertarian capitalist.
Okay, well, you're a libertarian capitalist. Those are two systems that you believe have been real and consistent and trustworthy across history. So that's why you've attached yourself to them, and not socialism, which you have presumably decided was deceitful and not real across time.
Actually, no. See, this is the reason why I don't like doing political compass tests, because they only give you a section. They don't let you explain everything. For instance, I like the idea of socialism in principle. Don't get me wrong, human nature in itself would deem it so it would be a case of it would never actually ever be able to implement, which means that obviously communism would never be able to be implemented either, because obviously socialism is the first form and then you lead up to communism. But I still like the ideas, or some of them at least, of socialism. I like the social netting. I like the social welfare. I like the idea of public schooling with a mixture of capitalism that's actually in there. I like the mixture of both. I'm probably what you would call the centrist on that aspect. I think that we need both. We need public schools for people that can't afford to go to a private school, but we need the private schools as well to be more abundant in what they are. So people that can afford them are then having to have the fact that they are cheaper, so more people can afford them. And for me, it would be a case of they would have to regulate themselves, meaning that the public schools would have to be as good as the private schools. And for the private schools to be able to deem them that it would be a case of it being worthwhile of you spending money to go there, would have to improve better. So it would be a case of every time through the privatization of the school as well, it would increase on the public side of the school. And it would just be a natural process of it being able to be elevated.
I'd also like to add as a side point, one of the reasons why I am such a conspiracist theorist sort of kind of person is the fact that when I was 16 in about 1985, I left school. And then over the years after that, the many, many years after that, I kept looking at documentaries and stuff. And it seemed to me that everything I was taught in school was a lie. As we've been talking about, this was a lie. You was wrong on this subject. You didn't understand this thing. And it just pushed me to start questioning things and look at the world from my own eyes and say, well, how do I know that's true? How do I know this is true? You know, it seemed to me even back then, I know it's been going on for centuries, but it seemed to me back then from 1985, the previous 5 years was just a lie.
Oh, well,
when I was at school.
They do the same thing if you stay on at school. When I was, I would have been 16 as well, I think. 16 or 17, moving from standard grade to higher. So that's the equivalent of O level up to A level. And
clever
first day of biology, they sit you down and they say, right, name us the structure of a cell. So you tell them. They go, that's wrong. And I go, well, bloody isn't wrong. I just did an exam on it and I got full marks. And they're like, yeah, but we taught you it wrong. And I was like, you fucking what, mate? Like, and then they proceed to tell you why what they teach you in O-level standard grade is wrong because it's easier on you, and this is what it actually looks like. And I was absolutely incendiary angry, and it's just like they do that within the school system, let alone
that makes me
with.
wonder. That sounds like a system that is still trying to figure out how to control people, because you found out the facts. They've said, "Oh no, you're wrong," and you're saying, "But it's not wrong," and they're going, "Oh no, we taught you wrong. This is the right path." That sounds like someone who themselves haven't learnt yet fully how to control you.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the first, I would imagine, step in successfully controlling somebody's brain is to tell them, or not, is to not tell them that you were controlling them and lying to them for 4 years. But I just couldn't believe it. So I obviously never trusted a fucking word they told me in any subject ever again. And I'm glad I didn't. Yeah. But it's like, that's just within the system. When you're in it and you're agreeing with what they're saying, they're telling you lies and admitting to it. So like, what hope do you have when you're on the outside? I mean, like with the Brexit thing, right? This is going back to the free movement issue. It doesn't need to be just people. It could be free movement of money, all that sort of shit. I think that I'm just going to fucking call them the Illuminati because it's the conspiracy and I'm allowed.
No, call them they. That's
what they have worked out is rather it's a lot of work to make people educated and reasonably prosperous and relatively sane. That's a lot of work. So what's easier to do is just create so much chaos and disinformation that you've got a bunch of complete morons who are all batshit crazy, who don't actually have countries anymore, and just control them. It's much easier. And then
that makes sense.
Anybody who is worthy in their eyes can be promoted up to the top of the pyramid, can't they? So they can justify it to themselves that way, rather than people like what we all believe in, presumably, of no, every individual has the ability to better themselves and should be given the ability or be given the opportunity to do so.
Does it come back to the old saying that of simply some of the time you can fool all the people, some of the time you can fool half the people? Is that their structure? You know that saying, you can fool all of the people some of the time, you can fool half the people all of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Is that the structure they're working within?
In my opinion, yes, but I think that that's why Brexit was such a big thing for me personally, was it was so many people, uneducated people, like formally educated, actually going, you know what, this doesn't make any fucking sense. Fuck you.
Yeah.
I mean, it was miraculous. It should never have happened. It should never have happened, and yet it still happened.
Especially
and I knew we would never get
the
Brexit
polls
that we voted for. We might get it, but I doubt it. But it's the fact that people were actually able to go and 24 hours a day you're listening to BBC and ITV and all that, and they actually said, nah, this is bollocks.
Yeah. Regardless of that, they went out en masse and said, we want to leave.
Yeah. It completely amazed me.
Doesn't want to listen at all. It's like John Major all over again, trying to force through, I can't remember the actual term, that basically made us a part of the European Union fully rather than being part of the ECC. That was completely done backhanded and made sure that nobody was going to vote on it. In fact, it was a case of he got the Tory whip to actually make sure that everybody voted to make sure it passed. And it was a case of he wouldn't let the normal people vote on it at all, or Parliament as full. He just passed it through on his own. That just says everything.
That's they call it the nanny state for a reason, eh? Because that's what you do with kids. You go, look, you're 5. You can't possibly understand this situation. I'm going to make the decision in your best interest for the best reasons, but I'm going to make the decision, not you. Well, this is a government. It's not a dad.
Well, that's the thing I always love about the MPs that always come out and go, oh, you didn't know what you voted. Maybe I didn't know what I voted for, but I knew how to vote for you, though, didn't I?
Yeah. Do you know that reminds me of? It reminds me of these people who moan about their wives. It's like, well, who's stupider? The wife for being a nag or you for marrying her, you know?
Exactly, yeah.
Moaning about them in public, you know? But, you know, with the thing of fooling people, that's my opinion of it. I think that they genuinely believe that they have the best system because people are generally, in their opinion, shite. But what Common Sense was saying about, you said something about, is it government or is it corporations? And that reminded me of, you know, globalism.
Yes.
it's not a new thing, right? Because even since the Roman Empire, you had the globalism. What we've got now is globalism, but very, very quick, because we've got transport and internet. So it's the same thing. We've always been global. So, well, how do you fight back against that now? Well, my opinion, right, is that you fight back the same way we did before, which is back in the day, when in the medieval period, when you had the Roman Church was law and the king was law, and you couldn't say anything to contradict them. What they did was they had the university, and the university was the first form of corporation, and they had to have it. They basically went to the king or whoever and said, "Look, we need to be able to say that you're wrong for the sake of argument in order to teach people." And they went, "Okay, fair enough," and that opened the door to analytical thinking. And sure enough, within a few years, we had the rise of capitalism, a middle class, all that sort of stuff in the 1700s. And that's what needs to happen again. I think there needs to be some way of private citizens getting together and forming something akin to a corporation in the old sense, where we can basically resist these globalist forces, but with their permission. Like, we need to trick them into letting us do it, kind of thing.
No. And we have to do it before they make it too expensive, because as Mr. CSG knows, to try and form a party, that they're pricing it out of our range of the common people.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Anyone want to donate? It's a good time to do it.
Yes, please. I'm going to ask a quick question to you two. I know Ogre's not here at this moment in time, but I kind of know what Ogre's answer would be. What do you, starting with Moz and then moving on to Compropoint, do you think there is going to be a Brexit? And if you do, then do you reckon it's going to happen in the next couple of months, so to speak, in the deadline time, or do you reckon it's going to happen afterwards? And if you don't, do you reckon that there's going to be a general election or a referendum?
I genuinely, from the start, from the one day that I cheered because we voted leave, I'd never believed from that moment they were going to allow it to happen, and they being whoever they are. I think the people want it. I think the people are fed up with the way the world is being governed and controlled. But I can't see a time where their power, the money behind them, and their control of the mainstream media and over the masses of people that are not interested, I can't see it happening. Brexit, it's always going to be in name. It's never going to actually be Brexit, I'm afraid, and that breaks my heart, because that's the death of Europe. That's all I have to say. Sorry.
That's fair enough. That's well said. Not a problem.
Very well said.
Your turn, Mr. Compropoint. Same question.
I don't claim to know, but I know what will influence it. So I don't know whether it will be Brexit or not, and what form it will take if it does happen. But what will influence it is how long will the people in the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe put up with the EU? Because if they get as fucked off with it as we have, then the EU will crumble before we need to leave it. The other thing is, it depends very much on what old Boris has to say soon, because that'll affect what the Conservative Party does next, and what the Conservative Party does next could trigger enough of a constitutional crisis to end two-party politics, and that would get us a Brexit, a decent one. But it's definitely not going to happen within the timeline. I would put money on that. Like what you said about the deadline, definitely not. But it might happen, and if it does happen, that'll be how it happens, in my opinion. What about you?
For me, I don't think that there will be a Brexit unless something very heavily changes. I think that we will be stuck in this in-out checkers deal. I know that it's a case of the amendment has been pushed through. The good thing that Labour have been able to actually do, thank God, is stop the idea of that if there isn't a deal struck, that we can still leave on World Trade Organization rules. So there is still hope that we can leave that way, which I'm severely hoping for. But I don't think that will happen. Your point about the idea that the EU is going to pull itself apart before we leave is probably going to be the most factual aspect. In fact, with the new deal that we are probably going to be doing with them, which will probably be us being shafted completely and utterly, even though we are the only country that really doesn't need the EU to function. for me, it's a case of the EU in itself will probably push more ideas and more force upon us to change the already skewered negotiations that Theresa May has already put forward. So, with the fact that the EU is going to be fractured already, we're in such a strong negotiating process, and yet somebody like Theresa May has come along and fucked it up for everyone. Whether you're a Ramona or whether you're a Leaver, nobody's happy with the Chequers deal, and that says everything about the deal. If people that don't want to leave are still saying it's a bad deal, then you know it's a bad goddamn deal. If you get people that are actually resigning left, right, and centre from your own government, that in itself says to you, maybe you're doing something wrong. The fact is that you're relying on the opposition to be able to pass amendments through to keep your bill going, rather than your own party suggests how weak you are as a government. So for me, no, I don't think that Brexit will happen. I also honestly feel that the Conservatives are turning into Tony Blair's Labour. They will not be elected after this 4 or 5 year, 3 to 4 year period, if nothing else happens. They will never be elected again for at least another 3 or 4 cycles, like Labour haven't been able to. And I honestly think that, because of the way that she is running the Conservatives themselves at this moment in time, they are unelectable in the next general election, wherever that may be. And people will remember this for at least a generation. So I would imagine that it would be at least 4 or 5 times before we even see the Conservatives gain any polls. And I honestly believe that.
And that scares me more, because then being the conspiracist, that makes me think that Theresa May is throwing the next election so that Labour win to bring socialism in.
I tell you what, I know that I say that I hate Jeremy Corbyn and I still hate his ideologies, but at least he says what his ideologies are. You can prepare yourself for when somebody tells you what they're going to do. With Theresa May, she said, "Yeah, Brexit means Brexit. Look at this Longhouse speech that I got. Longhouse speech, sorry. I've been saying, look at what I'm going to be doing for Brexit. I'm going to make sure we trade hard, that we do really well. We're going to have a hard Brexit. Brexit means Brexit, strong and stable." Oh, yeah, sorry, I flopped.
Britain has been very sedentary for a very, very long number of years, and it was about time something happened to upset things. And I think this might be
neutered is a better word. We've been neutered by.
Well, no, because we have been. I won't lie, we have been. But if you look back to all the riots and stuff that got people rights under, and I don't mean government granted rights, I mean rights that they decided on, back in the Victorian times, and then after World Wars, rights for homosexuals, all that sort of stuff. There's not really been much of an upset in politics for quite a while, to bring them back to earth. And I think this might be it, because the thing is that Common Sense Guy, while I'm not really in agreement in regards to Corbyn, I'm in agreement that he would probably be the one to take over and that Conservatives would be unelectable. But the thing is, I think that Corbyn would be so fucking toxic that would bring an end to the two-party system, or at least cause some kind of upset. A real game changer, a proper game changer, the likes of which we've not seen for probably about 70 or 80 years.
No, I actually agree with that. I tell you what I've been thinking or hypothesizing, and not obviously including my own party in this eventually. Well, I see it going to the point of Theresa May completely and utterly fucks up Brexit before we actually leave. There's a general election called. Jeremy Corbyn ends up winning it. I would say by a landslide, to be fair. But UKIP make exceptional leaps and bounds and gain a hell of a lot of seats. I think that Jeremy Corbyn and Labour themselves will then push for a referendum again to try and stop Brexit in itself. I think that they will lose that referendum. I then think that we will leave by World Trade Organization rules, or we will be forced to take the Chequers deal as it is. I think that certain Conservatives like Jacob Rees-Mogg and a couple of other staunch Brexiteers from both Labour and the Conservatives themselves, I think will move to UKIP. And I honestly feel that, as you quite rightly said, that Jeremy Corbyn will get in power, but it will be a case that he will fail. He will be toxic, as the word is. And I think they will push UKIP further and further to becoming a political party that is strong enough to actually take on both the Conservatives and Labour. And I feel that they're going to be the third party that everybody goes, well, we haven't had them in, let's have them in.
Yeah, there's two developments that could happen that really do worry me, though. The first development is that they do something like what they did with Greece, and just basically, in all but name, completely circumvent our government. So yeah, okay, Theresa May is still the Prime Minister, but and the Conservative Party is still in power, and the House of Commons are still in power, but they don't actually have any say in anything, and it's all run by a troika, as they called it. Because they could do that. What would we do to stop them? Like, what would we as people do to stop them? There's fuck all we could do, and there's fuck all we would do, because you said, we're neutered. The other possibility is that Jeremy Corbyn could push the right so far to the right that we could end up with some kind of fucked up V for Vendetta style situation where people are so fed up of the left wing that they just go back, 70 years in their mentality of, all right, that's it. No Muslims, no gays, no Jews, nothing like that. We're just going to have a completely standard, hard right-wing, alt-right society, and that does scare me. And I see it as a possibility because you can see when people get really angry and you push people too far, the backlash is always there, and it's happened around the world. Right-wing reactionaries. You notice how they don't call them reactionaries anymore, because if you're a high school kid, you want to know what they were reacting to, and they would have to tell you, well, socialism, and they don't want to tell you that, so they call them, fascists or whatever. And I genuinely fear a well-organized right-wing reactionary force of some kind, and that does scare me a lot.
Well, I agree with that.
No, I completely agree. I was just going to add to it. I do actually completely not agree with that. That's the reason why I think UKIP will be perceived as the centrist right version of what's going on. You have obviously Britain First. You have other parties that are very, very similar to that type of platform. And as you said, you've got more and more people that are being pushed further and further to the right. And I hate that argument when people go, oh, what? Well, just because I call people names and they won't let them talk about their problems, that they're going to go to find somewhere else where they can talk about it. Oh, that's stupid. Where do you think paedophiles go? Why do you think that? I keep on using this because it's an extreme example. Where do you think paedophiles go? Do you think that they go to a forum to not talk to people that are like them, that understand their views and their points, as horrid and insidious as they are? Do you not think they do that?
Well, I think you've both just added an I think this, so I have to do an I think this opinion. I think we should start using the tactics that other people are using.
No.
But in a logical way, in a sensible way. And we're doing it already through truth. So I think if you don't vote for the LBP, it's only because you're misogynistic, sexist, you hate LGBT, lives matters, blah, blah, blah. You know what to do the right thing.
Great endorsement there. Thank you very much, boss.
Absolutely. It's genuinely, it's something I believe in because, and again, it might be my own worldview, but because I speak to you and because we're here chatting, I know what your views are. I know they're honest. And that's what we're losing in the political system today. Theresa May wants to go for Brexit, but she's a Remainer. That's not honest. And we need to move back to that, get back to honesty. But I can't see that happening.
No, I appreciate that. I love this comparison that everybody draws up between her and Maggie Thatcher. I mean, my father was very, very similar to that, thinking, oh, she walks like Thatcher, she talks like Thatcher. I was like, do you not remember Thatcher? She was nothing like Theresa.
I'm going to have to mute, otherwise you're going to hear me uncontrollably laughing.
Well, no, I understand that, but this is somebody, my dad's over 70s odd. And obviously he remembers, Thatcher and things like that. And he's drawing comparisons because she's a female prime minister. And for me, I don't understand that idea where he's like, oh no, she can do it. And, even I got confused by a point. I thought at one point that she was actually going to do it. All she ended up doing was kicking it down like a can, kicking the can down the road, so to speak, to be able to pass it on to try and push it through at the end, her point of view. But a point that I was actually trying to physically make is that Theresa May is not a conservative. For a start, she's a feminist, a staunch feminist as well. Now, I don't have a problem with people that are feminists. I have a problem with people that are third wave feminists. People that actually believe that women do not have the same or very similar rights to what men do, to the point that where in some aspects they actually have better rights than what men do. Now, this is not an MRA speech either. It's a case of if you want true equality, then you want true equality. It's not a case that you want to be treated better than men, because then you don't want equality by the definition of the word. But all that Theresa May is an authoritarian Puritan. That's literally all she is. She wants to control everything that everybody does, hence why she wants the internet controlled and accepting what's going on with the freedom of speech issues that are going on with the internet. The reason why she's pushing the ideas of making sure that people are not allowed to say certain things about religion. Because remember, obviously, she obviously has a pastor as a father. She also has at the other points that where she just wants to stop people from doing what they want to do. And the reason why she's a Puritan is because all that she wants to do is stop people from doing what they want to do and having fun, so to speak, in the pure and utter sense. And by that, look at the porn laws that are supposed to be coming into.
Let's not forget that what you've just said is completely accurate and actually expands out to the other governments of the world as well. It's not just her, people. It's more and more governments in the world are looking towards this way.
Yeah, and let's make no bones about it, right? This is the conspiracy, and let's just go balls out with this. These people would rather you were dead than free. And I don't know why, right? I don't know why it matters to them so much, but they would rather you were in a cell or dead or shot or raped or whatever than just able to do what you liked, which is despicable. And that's what these people devote their lives to doing, is to make sure they can prohibit your behavior and, or worse still, prescribe it.
Can I give you an extreme case of that, or what I think is an extreme case of that? I mean, everyone argues that your fundamental human rights are your right to war and your right to the toilet. But in certain places in America, if you try and live off grid, if you put a barrel out to try and collect rainwater, it's illegal because you're not connected to the system.
Yeah.
So why can you not even, if it rains on you, why can you not open your mouth and drink that water? Surely,
well, America is a good cautionary tale for they have a very clearly codified system of freedom and checks and balances and all that pish, and they've held it longer than we have, but they're just as susceptible to the same influence as we are. And theirs is all codified. So people say, "Oh, Britain doesn't have a constitution." I say that as a descriptive term, not as an insulting term, because it doesn't matter if the people are not awake and paying attention. Then it doesn't matter if we have it all written down somewhere, because it's just paper.
Well, one of the interesting things is that and again, I'm not an expert on it, is everyone says Britain doesn't have a constitution, but they have what is called the common man law. Now, I know that's moving into I'm a free man and that kind of stuff, and that's another stream entirely. But there is something in place that says you're allowed, as long as you're not interrupting anyone, you're allowed, to go in the woods and survive. But the governments have gone, no, that doesn't matter. We're not interested in that. And that's what the police swear an oath to protect the common man. But the governments again have said, no, it doesn't matter. We're not interested in that.
The only problem is that with a lot of forests nowadays, they're privately owned.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But there was the pre-idea with guns. There was the pre-idea that you allowed... Yeah, sorry.
No, I completely not understand what you said. But the reason why it's changed is because all of the land is not free land anymore. It's not a case of it being, there's a forest that nobody owns. It's a case that somebody owns that forest, whether it be government, the Queen, or fucking a privately owned function.
And that's how they took control.
No, I understand. But that's the point of that. I mean, you made an exceptionally great point about the idea of rainwater. The fact is that the state can say that, well, if you're going to live off of your own, or in some states, not in every state, I think it's only actually in one. I think in the same state that they tried to stop people using wind for collecting energy as well. But in that particular state, it was a case of they had a lot of freemen, so to speak, that were living off of the land. Now, I don't have a problem with people doing that. That's fine. You live the way that you want to live. But the thing is, the state passed laws to specifically stop people from doing that. Now, as you quite rightly said, that proves the authoritarian levels of governments or even state legislators, put that into perspective, council legislators, that are going around and telling people what they can and cannot do with their human rights. And as you quite rightly equated to, they can't even put their mouth up to the sky and drink water that is literally falling from the sky.
Yep, you have to be tied into the system where you give us money.
Yeah, and this is the other thing, is they have the laws in place that say laws like that are unlawful, yet they are still laws and they're still enforced. And that shows you how you're not protected by the system. The system won't protect you from the system.
Well, I know in England there are laws that do apply, and then there are acts, ACTS, because I can't say it properly, acts, where an act is not a law, and they can imply that you have to comply with this act, but it's not actually. It doesn't oversee you, if that makes sense.
Well, that's where the sort of reality meeting theory comes in, because it's like, well, yeah, you can argue that, but when the policeman's knocked your kneecaps in with his truncheon and you're in the police van, you can that's not any good to you, is it? And
well, you can complain, but then the government says, no, you're wrong.
Yeah, I think in some situations you could argue we would be better under, the likes of the robber barons and stuff than we are under the government in a lot of ways.
Definitely not. For the simple fact is, even though there's acts and laws in place, if you're able to cite the laws that counteract the acts, then the acts are no longer valid. The same thing is in the US. If you're able to stipulate that the fact that the act that has been passed by a state completely and utterly contradicts a constitutional amendment, then a constitutional amendment completely and utterly makes the act unvoid. So if you can prove the fact that the law that's been passed interferes with the Constitution in the US, doesn't matter what the law is, it can be struck off or non-affected to you.
And
you saw what happened with Dankula. That was a Communications Act, and
but doesn't that highlight the point of making the understanding so complicated that the peasants can't do it or can't afford to get the lawyers to do it?
Because you can prove in court that you're right, and the judge will still go, "Yeah, but I'm the judge, so fuck off."
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. We've got to the point where the people in power are just saying, "No, I'm not interested. I don't care what you think. You're going to do what I'm telling you to do."
Yeah, and basically all the laws and the acts and all that sort of stuff, they're just window dressing and rationalizations. They're not. That's again like what I was saying about the social contract. Not to get into a massive debate about that or anything, but in my opinion, the social contract is between you and me. It's not between me and Theresa May. You know what I mean?
I would disagree with that. The reason why we have a social contract in its first and conception is between you and the state.
Because it was a biblical thing. It was to do with you and God, and by extension, you and the rest of humanity. The state was never part of it. That was a relatively new thing, and frankly, it takes two to contract. And
I thought that Locke actually wrote the social contract, or the idea of a social contract between you and the state.
I think that was Mill. I don't think. Oh shit! I sometimes make them up, but Locke was more extreme than Mill was in regards to his anti-statism.
Locke was actually the one that wrote about. Sorry, not writ. I'm not fucking retarded.
But did Locke not write debunking the social contract?
No, he was the one who wrote about the social contract.
All right. But yeah, in my opinion, the social contract, again, the government is just an organization like the mafia or, Halliburton. They don't get anything from me, and I don't owe them anything. I owe you for being human. I owe you certain things, but I don't owe them anything.
I'd like to ask you both, if you look at the dictionary definition of the word civilized, or civilization as we call it, to me it always just seems to mean I will be polite to you. It just means I won't punch you in the face. How close are we to that going out of the world?
Very.
Yeah, very. And I also agree with that definition. I think that's one. People seem to universally agree on that one, of like, it's conversation over fighting.
Because I've looked at the word civilization, and you think of this great construction of houses and buildings and races and stuff that marches off into the future, and I just think, no, it just means I won't punch you in the face if you say something mean to me.
No, that's what civility. That's what civility means.
Exactly. There you go.
Means civilization is actually a descriptive term of the society that has built what it has. That's why you can classify civilization from Stone Age all the way up to today.
Yeah, which just to me means I will accept the governance of people at the top, as long as they're governing me and protecting my borders, to bring it back round.
Exactly. I mean, the idea of civilization in itself is the actual idea of what people have built. The art, the foundation that's going around, the level of civility that is also around in civilization. It's a case
because Locke wrote it like a balancing act. So
yes,
that's kind of why I meant, I wasn't trying to contradict you, but I do read it more as an indictment of government rather than a support of their definition of the social contract, because in my opinion, the government has, since World War I, broken the social contract and basically been illegitimate. And by Locke's kind of reckoning, I would need to refresh myself to be able to quote him, but his thing was very much like you're saying, of like, okay, we need to live in a country. How do you have a country? Right, you have some borders. And, he kind of built it up from there. And then it was kind of anything goes after that, so long as it's in the interest of the people, which is very vague. And he did try and outline that as best he could. But, I feel that the government has, for probably going on about 80, 90 years now, not been legitimate.
No, I'd if I'm being honest, it would be a case of, I have to say the government has been legitimate, but I think the processes of the government being legitimately for the people, that's something that can be in contention.
I think it speaks to the strength of Locke as well, that we can read it, his rules, both as an indictment or support of the government, because that's what it's designed to be able to do. So we can make sense of it, and I think that's really good that still stands up, and we can say one way or the other with his rule.
I completely agree. That's the reason why people like fucking Sargon use him as a quotation. It's a case of the theory of Locke in itself is a case of, as you already said, there's a check and balances. The government itself has to be reporting technically to the people, and the people have to report to the governments, and it's a counterbalancing act. That if you treat the government well, then the government treats you well. If you treat the government bad, the government treats you bad. Like you said, it's a balancing act, to put it in simplistic terms.
Are we not talking about a government that is actually working for the people, or a government that's working for their own benefit? Because I'll be honest, I'm not as well read.
That's what we were just talking about. I mean, Locke in itself is the idea of the government is working for the people and the people are working for the government. It's a mutually beneficial point. That's why it's done on checks and balances, as in it needs to be counterbalanced. You need to help the state for the state to help you, and vice versa. But the question that CompuPoint made was the case of illegitimate governments. Now, the case is that the government itself is not illegitimate. It's a case that they are legitimately running the country, and by that I mean that they are not doing the will of the people. Now, that has been going on for a fucking long time, where they're not doing the will of the people. They are pretending that they are, and they're pretending that they are sugarcoating it to be the will of the people, but they are not doing it for the will of the people. Once they get into government, they are no longer being under the point of checks and balances anymore, and they are under the checks and balances of the parliament itself and the House of Lords, which is not the people by any stretch of the imagination. It is no longer controlled or run or regulated by the people at all. And that's where Locke's idea of counterbalances and checks have now been forgotten by our government. or phased out, should we say, because people themselves are no longer in control of what goes on. We are no longer involved in voting anymore, or trying to pass any sort of laws, or try and tell the people what's going on, or even getting away with disvolving the government if necessary.
No, I agree. I think there's a mass disillusion. And how much do you think people voted to leave just off the back of they're fed up?
Well, no, I actually agree with that, but I would actually take it a step further. When it first started, and this is a conspiracy theory, you have a lot of companies. In fact, on BBC, I believe that they actually showed someone actually counting the votes before they were putting them away, and they moved a couple out of the way from it. And that was on one of the actual BBC during the middle of the night, on the actual transition.
That was the Russians.
But yeah, apparently it was the Russians. But no,
that pesky Putin.
Yeah. That just goes to show you the levels of what the government would do in itself to try and get the way that it wants. I mean, you've got the left wing now, or the Leavers that are the Remainers that are attacking the Leave voters or the Leave campaign and saying that they've done something wrong. They've investigated them 3 times to try and prove that they've done something wrong. And they finally found something that might actually stick, which is circumstantial at best. But they found something, and now they're all saying that the Leave voters did this and the Leave voters did that. What about when Mr. Cameron himself put £9 million into a fucking leaflet before the referendum even started to try and push his ideology and his idea?
But that's not the agenda, is it? David Lammy, we've got to make this referendum void.
Yeah, although I'm not going to get into David Lammy, otherwise I'll be here for another day. My alarm's just gone off to tell me that it's at 11 o'clock. So, final words from people, and then we'll have to get off because I don't want to spend and waste people's time too much. So, Moz, if you wouldn't mind going first, I know it's a bit.
No, I'm good.
I know that's fair enough.
It's going to be kind of a short one, but we was talking about it earlier. We was talking about open borders and in the world in general, open borders. And I kind of brought it back to, well, your own property, your own house. So I recommend for anyone that thinks open borders are a good idea, when you go to bed tonight, first thing or the last thing you should make sure you do is open your front door, unlock it, open it, and just leave it there. Thank you to the panel. I always learn so much more from you than I give. But yeah, good chat. Thank you, guys. Don't forget to leave your doors unlocked if you think open borders are a good idea.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moz. Excellent speech. And don't you dare say that you don't give as much as you receive. It's a terrible thing to say. We love having you on. But
we're not talking about the orgies.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, yeah, fair enough.
That's for afterwards. Don't tell people what we do afterwards.
But anyway, yeah, so final word. I would just say that this thing was about the EU and trying to tie that into all sorts of conspiracies and things like that. And it's part of the oldest conspiracy, which is to deprive you of your natural rights. And that conspiracy has taken many forms and been done in many different ways by many different people, some of whom were even fighting each other over how it should be done. But that's the oldest one, and you owe it to yourself to seek out anybody who's trying to do that to you and resist them. And, you know, nobody's perfect. We can't all do it all the time, but you need to try and do that. And it's, you know, been going back a long time. You know, you've got the Illuminati, you've got the League of Nations, the UN, the EU, all these organizations. It's been the same goal: one world government in which you have no fucking say in your own life, and that's their goal. So don't let them win. Have as much say in your own life as you can possibly manage. And thank you to my fellow panel members, and thank you to everybody watching. Hope we've been entertaining for you. Good night.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Crumplepoint. And there's a reason why I turned my camera off, because I kept on playing with my hair, and now it's completely not a fucking mess, and I'm turning into a little gal. But no, I'd like to second Mr. Crumplepoint's point on that. And Moz, you're always more than welcome, my friend. It's a case of, yeah, thanks for that. It's a case of you're always welcome, Moz, because it's a case of you do add a hell of a lot to the conversation, even if you feel that sometimes you get cut off or people overstep their mark, and I mainly mean me, because I'm just an arse like that sometimes. I like to get a point across, especially when it's fresh in my head. I can't help myself like that. I like the interaction that all three of us have, especially when Ogie was here as well at the beginning. It was a case of all four of us had interacting points. I feel that we all bounce off of each other very well. I think that's the idea and topics of being able to have an actual discussion. I think that's lost nowadays, where you can't just have the topics free flowing. You have to stick to a set agenda. You have to stick to a set point, and you're not allowed to deviate. I think if you're going to have conversations that are actually going to benefit what's going on, you have to understand people's points of view. And you can't understand a person's point of view just by sticking to a point-by-point basis. You have to be able to let them elaborate on what's going on rather than just stifling them by sticking to a point-by-point. I mean, that correlates to what we were saying about the actual school system or the education system in itself. The fact that people are not allowed to free think for themselves or find their own sources. CompuPoint made an excellent point where you were given direct sources and things like that. I remember when I was at college, in fact, not too long ago, when I was doing counselling, it was a case of you got set sections and set links to where you needed to go to be able to find the correct information for your course. It is like what people say, it's spoon feeding. Rather than you actually learning what's going on and actually free thinking, it's a case of you being doled down and not told and not being able to use the internet properly and learn for yourself. I think that we've done really well, possibly not really stuck to the point of Brexit. I think a lot of people get the idea. The idea of Brexit for us is a case of we don't really think it's going to happen. We never really did. We kind of got disillusioned into the idea of maybe it will work, maybe it wouldn't. We got kind of drawn into that. And it was more of a case of we kind of should have really seen it coming, shouldn't we, really? I do think that there will be some form of backlash to this. I do not think that there will be, especially for the Conservatives, I do not think that there will be a case of people actually following the Conservatives for too much longer. I feel that they've played around with people's emotions and people's minds and people's face for long enough. From trying to throw away a general election so that they weren't in power anymore to throwing away Brexit in itself by calling it Brexit when all it is a surrender or a count-out to bloody EU. Now, with that being said, normally I don't have too much to say, but I do have a lot to say at the minute. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to. You'll have to come back again next week, or you'll have to come back again soon, or ask me on Twitter, or ask me to come onto a stream. Or even any of the other guys, if you want to get with them, they're on Twitter. If you want to know who they are, tweet me, or if you can find them, tweet them, and I'll get you in contact with them. If not, well, that's your hard luck. They're quite intelligent blokes, and they deserve being talked to and talked about. That being said, though, lads and ladettes, I will speak to you all again real soon. Bye for now.